Welcome to part 3 of our series on working with battery 4. Let's just go ahead and get started. In this video, we're going to take a look at the main tab. And to start with, we have a volume envelope that's available to us, and it does have a power button. By default, it is powered off. So if we have a cell selected, we can just click on the power button, and then we can see that we have an envelope that is displayed over our waveform as long as we're hovering over these controls, and we can have a visual representation of what that envelope is doing. So we can see that we have an immediate attack, our hold and decay and sustain are all up, our release is at 3.6 milliseconds. And this is why our envelope looks like a box when that is showing there. Keep in mind that we have two different envelope modes. This one is going to be a bit more complicated, and we have a second one here where we only have attack, hold, and decay, but we're going to focus more on this more comprehensive one. And so if we adjust the attack, then we can see that that changes up above, and the attack will determine how long it takes for your sample to reach its maximum level, and we have a choice between 0 milliseconds all the way through 15 seconds. The hold is going to determine how long the sample will remain at maximum level. We can also set this between 0 milliseconds and 15 seconds. Our decay determines the time it takes for the sample to fall from the hold or maximum level to the sustain level. Now, our sustain sets the level that will be maintained during this sustain phase of your envelope as long as you're holding the key or pad on your MIDI controller. The release, this is going to determine the time it takes for your sample to return to 0 level after you've released the key or pad on your controller. Now, most of us are familiar with working with envelopes, but just know that the release is going to be important within battery because this is going to allow you to control the behavior of when you're triggering your pads. So if you would like to, for instance, on this cell, I have a let me press F4 and open up my on-screen piano keys. And for this cell, I've got a guitar strum. And if I go ahead and deactivate the volume envelope, and I'll just play this back as it is. So whenever I trigger this with my keyboard, or if it's triggered with a MIDI controller, it's going to play that sample completely through. Now, if I go ahead and activate the volume envelope, the release is at 3.6 milliseconds. So as soon as I release, it's basically going to stop playback. If I hold, then it will play the complete sample. So if you have a sample that you would like to control that behavior, just keep in mind that the release is going to do that. And if I were to raise this all the way up, then we're back to our initial behavior. And another point that I'd like to make about envelopes when you're working with battery is that the attack can actually come in handy if you're working with a sample that maybe has a click or a pop, or it's not starting exactly as you'd like. While you can come in and adjust these borders here, as we saw in part 2, I believe, we can also make use of the attack and then adjust how that begins. Or maybe if the volume is a bit high, this strum has a bit of a strong attack at that initial strum, so we can adjust that to control volume as well. I'm going to go ahead and just move on here to the pitch envelope. This, like the volume envelope, has a power, and it also has two different modes. These envelope selectors will allow us to choose between this standard mode or an easy mode. And we're going to focus on the standard one here. And as with the volume envelope, as long as we're hovering over the controls here, we're going to see in our display that this envelope will give us a visual representation of the adjustments that we're making. And so the pitch envelope is going to allow us to control the behavior of how the pitch behaves throughout the envelope. And we first have a mount here, and this is going to set the degree or amount of pitch change that will occur in your pitch envelope. Decay 1 allows you to adjust the time it takes for the envelope to go from its initial pitch adjustment set in the amount to the pitch set in the break knob. Now the break allows you to adjust the point where the envelope changes from your initial pitch settings and begins to return back to the normal pitch of your sample. Now the decay 2 allows you to set how long it will take for the pitch to return to normal from your breakpoint. Now what does all of this mean? Right now, if we were to take the amount to the center area here, this adjusts in semitones, we are not going to have any changes to our pitch. It's just playing back as normal. Now if I move to the left, we are lowering the beginning of this sample. Actually, I've got that backwards. So as we move to the left, we raise the pitch up, and then the decay is going to determine how quickly that pitch change happens. So if I raise the time on this, and that's a more immediate attack here. Okay, and then we can lower that amount here. Let me lower the decay. And so you can begin to see how this amount is going to adjust what that pitch does in the beginning of our envelope. Now the break, we can, let's take that down. And in this instance, we're going down and then back up. Now the decay is going to determine how quickly we return back to our initial pitch. Okay, and that is the pitch envelope. And just keep in mind that this is just a simpler version of the pitch envelope when we click on this one to the right here. And I'm going to go ahead and deactivate the pitch envelope. And let's move on to the velocity module. And we have 2 volume and 2 pitch here. Now the 2 volume, basically, when this is set to 0%, no matter how hard or how much you vary playing on your keyboard as far as the velocity is concerned, or how hard you're triggering your pads, the volume's always going to be at full volume, whatever you have set here for your sample or your cell. As we increase this to 100, then it's going to take into account the velocity information that's coming in from your MIDI controller and apply that to the cell. So since I'm using the on-screen piano keys, my velocity is set to 98%. There is no variation. So let's take the snare here. And then I will change this to a heavy variation in velocity. And we can see that now our varying velocity information is affecting the volume level of our snare. If I take this down to 0, then it's going to ignore the variation in velocity. And I'll go ahead and take that back up to 100. And I'm going to turn the variation off. And then let's move on to the pitch. This is adjusted in semitones, and basically, however hard or soft you are triggering your keys or your pads on your controller, this is going to affect the pitch of your sample or the cell that you're currently working with. So right now, by default, it's on 0. And actually, let's move to the kick here. So this to pitch is at 0 as well. Now, if I go ahead and turn some variation on, I'll put that on heavy again. We can hear that the velocity or the volume level is changing because we have that at 100. But I'm going to take this down to 0% to make this very clear how the pitch is changing. I'll raise this all the way up. Well, I'll put it midway. So we're working with 3.2 semitones. Our adjustments will be within that range. If I go all the way up to 12 semitones, we can see we have a broader range of variation for the pitch of our bass drum. I'm going to take that back to 0 and turn my velocity variation back to none. Next in line, we have our engine module, and this is going to allow you to choose between two sample engine modes, or sampler engine modes. We have sampler mode, which is on by default, and we also have a stretch mode. So let's start with the sampler. In sampler mode, battery stores your sample data, your sample that you have loaded in your cell. And actually, let's change to this one here, this little piano sample. So in standard, battery is going to store this piano sample within the RAM and applies any pitch shifting by resampling the audio sample. We do have a direct from disk option down below, so if you click that, you can engage direct from disk. And also within the sampler engine, we can choose between standard and vintage. The standard makes use of battery's standard sample engine, and with the vintage selected, we can then choose from a couple of different emulated classic samplers, the S1200 and the MP60. Now, this sampler engine is really going to come into play when we start to adjust the pitch of our samples. So if I were to play back our sample, that's how it is in its initial pitch. And then if I were to raise this up, and let me actually come down a bit. So you can hear the artifacts in that, and that's because we have the S1200 set. If I come back to standard, okay, so that's using the standard sample engine. I'll come back to vintage. And then let's try with filter high mid. And let's check out the MP60, see how that sounds. I actually like that one. But you can hear how you're going to have a different quality of your sound depending on what you're choosing here. And I'm going to just put this back to standard, and then let's move on to the stretch. Now in stretch mode, battery makes use of granular synthesis to change the sample speed while still keeping the original pitch information. And we have two different modes to choose from. We can use either standard or pro. Let's just start with taking a look at standard. We have grain, speed, and smooth down at the bottom. Grain, this is going to determine the size of the sound particles used for resynthesis, and the speed changes the playback rate independently of the sample's pitch. The speed is adjusted in percentages, so right now we're at 100%, which means there's not going to be any adjustment to the playback rate of our sample. If we were to put this to 200, then that would effectively double the speed, and if we take this down to 50, then that will play back at half the original speed, and so on. So at 100%, this is the original playback speed. And actually, let me take this back up to 0 for the tuning. Okay, so let's cut that playback in half by taking it down to 50%. And we can hear some artifacts in there, and we can use the grain and smooth to kind of tweak this a little bit. So let's actually raise up the grain size. Keeping in mind that this is going to determine the size of the sound particles used for resynthesis. And what happens if we take this all the way down to the left? And again, the smooth helps to reduce artifacts in your adjusted sample. So that's already at 100%. If we were to take that down, we're going to get a lot of artifacts in here. So you can really hear that popping, and that's not, you know, anything to do with latency. That's just the smoothing. Taking that up to 100 improves that. And again, if we were to take this up to 200, then this is going to double the playback. Let's take the grain down and hear how that sounds. The smooth. And I'm just going to take this back to 100%. And next we have the Pro setting. The Pro setting makes use of Battery's Pro Stretch engine, and it's going to provide you with the cleanest resampling that I found, at least. So keeping with our little piano sample here, we have no adjustment being made because we're at 100%. If I were to raise this up to 200%, effectively doubling, we can hear that that's a lot cleaner than the standard engine. And let me just take this down. And while I was getting ready for this tutorial, I actually discovered this. This is really nice. When it's taken all the way down, I kind of want to write a song to this one here. So I'm taking this all the way down to 7.7%. Let's check that out. I mean, that's just very atmospheric and dark. I like that a lot. Okay, and let's go ahead and move on. Next, we have a filter here, and this offers a simple low-pass, high-pass filter. This is pretty straightforward. We have a power button to engage that, a high cut handle, and a low cut handle. So let me come back to the guitar. We can cut the highs and cut the lows. Pretty straightforward. I'll go ahead and power that off. And next in line we have a compressor, a simple one knob compressor. We have got a power button up top. And once we engage the compressor, we can really use this to help smooth out any audio samples that we're working with. Say if you have huge variance within the audio levels and you just want to kind of balance that out, we can engage the compressor. We could also use that with drum sounds, you know, the kick, for instance. Say this guitar, if we were to introduce a bit of compression here, we're taking out some of the dynamics there. And then we have the VU meter, which is going to show you the gain reduction that's being applied. And that's actually a bit much, and you can hear it's distorted a little bit. Let's come back to the kick. And that is our compressor. I'll go ahead and power that off. Next in line, we have a send module, and this is going to allow us to apply effects to each individual cell and the amount of the effect that we're going to apply. We have a delay or a reverb to choose from. And let's move on to a different sample here. So let's go ahead and send some to the delay. And this is adjusted in decibels. And then we also have reverb. Now, where are these actually being sent to? We would want to come to the master tab, and then we will see here that this is the reverb and this is the delay. So we can even fine tune these and make adjustments, and we're going to go over these in more detail when we get to this section in the later in the series. But just know that, for instance, the reverb, we could really take that size up. We've got damp control, and for the delay, we can even change the time. Let's put this on 30 seconds. Half note. We've got panning. So there's really a lot of options that are available to us when we start working with sound design in Battery, and that's one of the things that I love about it. So we will wrap up here, and in part 4 we will take a look at the effects module and modulation. I'm hoping to get through both of those, and then we'll go ahead and cover the rest of the tabs in following tutorials. Thanks for watching.